there's a lot of people that don't want to talk bad about it, essentially because they're making money off it and they just don't
Right.
know. I think a lot of people are addicted on it right now and they don't even know, or they don't want to admit it, or they're in denial. Prep ended and I tried to stop taking it and I started getting cold sweats. I didn't want to train. I had no energy. I had no sex drive. There's nothing I could find happiness in the world, which is very similar to heroin withdrawals or oxy withdrawals.
Virtually every substance that you need to do at the pro level in bodybuilding, people are warned about those things. So why is it that the warning factor is not coming through on this in particular?
Well, I think because it's
All right, welcome back everyone to another episode of the Bodybuilding Breakdown. I am joined today by Nasty Nate Spear down in Florida. Nate, how's it going, man?
what's going on, my man? How you doing? How you doing today?
That's going pretty well, going pretty well. So I actually reached out to you after I found a pretty interesting post that you put on your Instagram, specifically regarding Kratom in particular. I want to talk to you about some of your upcoming competition plans and what you have coming up in the future as well, because I've always we've been on a couple podcasts together, the Canadian Beef podcast, and I've been interested in when it is you're going to compete next. So we'll definitely get into some of that as well. But the Kratom post was something that really got some reaction from the bodybuilding world, I found. So I wanted to ask you specifically to start, you know, by your definition, what has been, your experience with Kratom? What is Kratom for people that may not understand? Give us a bit of a rundown.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the problem is, right now there's just not a whole lot of education on kratom. And first of all, the problem is in the US, it's legal. So it's everywhere, especially in Florida, there's a smoke shop on every corner that sells kratom. They have signs, everywhere. Even the gas stations sell kratom down here, which is pretty crazy. And I think the problem is, when it first came out was like 10, 15, even 20 years ago, I think. But the problem is it was a leaf and they made it into a tea and it was just a relaxant, it was pretty mild, no big deal, So I think it was just the FDA was sort of like, okay, this isn't really too much of a problem. But then what happened was, they started taking that kratom leaf and making it into an extract, which in turn made it much stronger. And um, it's pretty much like an opioid. And, I think the misinformation is even if something isn't an opioid or an opiate, it can still have the same effect as far as physical dependence on the body, meaning like, there's things to come off of like heroin and oxys, like Suboxone, methadone. Those aren't opioids, but if you take them long enough, your body becomes physically dependent on them and you go through withdrawals, cold sweats, diarrhea, you can't sleep, you're severely depressed, et cetera, et cetera. You usually have to go to a rehab or a detox to come off this stuff. So just because something isn't an opioid or an opiate does not mean that you cannot become physically dependent on it. So for
Well,
me,
what is it? What are the effects that people get from kratom? Like, what's been your experience with it? Why are people so taking it in such forms of being, kind of a mainstream thing almost in bodybuilding, very commonplace these days? What is the effects in terms of bodybuilding that people get as advantages?
so yeah, so the first time I took it, I felt really in a positive mood. So like, let's say if you're sad or just not really feeling like you have energy, you take it and really you feel like great. It's just sort of like uplifts your mood and makes you more sociable, more talkable. You're just everything is a little bit more pleasant. And then for me, I used it in prep because, I heard all these bodybuilders essentially saying, hey, this isn't addicting, this isn't a problem. It makes me feel great, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, when I took it, it was like I did cardio and like, let's say I do an hour of cardio fasted, it was no problem. I felt great. I didn't feel as hungry. Um, and training was much easier. So a lot of guys are using it in prep because it makes prep much easier. It's not as much of a suffering, if you will. And the problem with kratom is it's very tricky because it can be misleading, meaning when you take it, you don't really feel bad. You don't really feel super high. So in your head, you can justify it and be like, oh, well, I don't feel like it's not like I'm high off a weed or I'm intoxicated. There's no intoxicated feeling. You could be on kratom and someone could not even know, essentially, but inside you feel almost like it's an antidepressant. You feel happier, you feel just better about life, and everything's a little bit more colorful and just nothing is everything's a little bit easier. So for me, I started taking it in prep just to make cardio easier and training easier. And I was not really thinking it was a big deal because, I kept hearing it's not addicting, it's not an opioid, it's not a problem. And
And
then
it is performance enhancing. Like you do get an
oh yeah,
enhancement in your performance in the gym. Yeah.
oh yeah, 100%. It sort of reminds me of like in the 90s when the guys were, talking about Nubane and how they would take it for training and like take it for cardio, and then just becomes they use it more and more, and everyone just sort of excuse it and say, "Oh, it's not a problem, it's justifiable." And in their head, it's easy to justify in your head. But the problem was for me, I kept taking it in prep, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna stop taking this after prep. Well, prep ended, and I really couldn't stop taking it because I was doing mint 45 gel packs. I'd probably do like 3 or 4 a day, and prep ended, and I tried to stop taking it, and I started getting cold sweats. I didn't want to train. I had no energy. I had no sex drive. I was severely not depressed, essentially. There was nothing I could find happiness in the world, which is very similar to heroin withdrawals or oxy withdrawals, just identical, and it's very hard because, it lasts for about 7 or 10 days and it's just miserable. So a lot of people are just, they'll just keep taking Kratom, and for me, what happened was, um, prep ended and I kept taking it because I couldn't come off it. I just didn't have the willpower to do it, and what happened was too, there's another thing now that's new is there's these 7-O pills, which if you look at my post, the guy that was in the hospital, that was because he found these, and they're a pill that's like an extract of the extract and an alkaloid. So it's very, very potent. And if you look it up on Google, it says it's like 17 more times more powerful than morphine. So, and these are being sold in gas stations, head shops, and they're just making them stronger and stronger. They're just little chewable pills. And the problem is your tolerance gets higher and higher. So if your tolerance gets higher, the more you're taking, the more severe the withdrawal symptoms are, the harder it is to get off, and for me, where I went wrong is there was not much education on it. And I had thrown my back out from training, which had happened a lot. And I just was really debilitated. I couldn't even go anywhere. So I started taking the 7-O pills because it said this one's for pain. So the problem with Kratom is there's not much there's a lot of misinformation and they misguide you. So all Kratom is not created equally. So one will say, oh, this is for energy, this one is for sleep, this one's for pain. So I was in pain. I didn't think much of it. And I started taking the chewable pills, and those are a lot more stronger. That feels like a Percocet, essentially. And it worked, but the problem is once you get on those little pills, the 7-O pills, it's very, very hard to get off. 4 or 5 hours later, you're going in withdrawals. Like I was waking up at, 5, 6 in the morning, getting cold sweats, and I'd have to take one just to go back to bed, and then my whole day was, I'd have to take it pretty much around the clock, and
But even those more concentrated extracts still don't have a euphoric feeling in your experience. Is that right?
oh no, it's definitely euphoric. I mean, you have like a
Okay.
body high, and you just feel like, everything's a little bit brighter and cheery, like, everything's good in life.
I
And,
see.
it's definitely like a great antidepressant. The problem is, it's you're physically become dependent on it and then you can't come off. And like I said, the physical, the tolerance becomes higher and higher. And, I'll admit, if you're not an addict and you can be responsible, you can probably, there's some guys that can probably take the 45 gummies here and there and be fine. The problem is there's not much education on it, first of all. So a lot of guys are saying it's not addicting, which it is definitely addicting. You can definitely get physical um, dependency on it, meaning you'll go through withdrawals if you take it more frequently. So, if someone takes it, like they'd have to take it like, once here and there, be responsible about it, and you could probably be fine. But the problem is a lot of guys are taking it in prep. So we're already going through suffering, you know what I mean? So a lot of guys, they take it in prep and they start using it every day, just because it makes everything a little easier. But if you take it for more than if you take it for every day consistently, it becomes very hard to come off of it, and like I said, there's not, so now these companies too, like I said, there's like these little glass bottles in these head shops, and there's like the 7-O extract in some of these, and you don't even know it, unless you take a picture on your phone and you zoom in, you can't even see half the time what he's even on the stuff, you know what I mean? So it's very misleading. And I think a lot of these companies just know people are becoming physically dependent on it. And it's just a money churn. And It's nothing against the IFBB or any athletes, because I think there's just not, they just don't aren't educated, and they're just ignorant on the fact, because they don't have an addiction history. Luckily for me, I have past addiction problems, so I sort of been educated on this stuff a little bit more. Obviously, when I was an idiot just to try it, but like I was saying in the beginning, is like I have an addict brain. So for me, I can easily justify if someone's saying, "Oh, it's not addicting," and then I take it once, and for me, once I put something like, especially an opioid in my body once, I'm gonna find a way to keep taking it. You know what I mean? Mentally, which, there's a lot of addicts in the bodybuilding world. Let's face it, there's a lot of people that have like a lot of messed up past, or, there's a reason why we bodybuild, a lot of us. So I just think the problem is there's just not a lot of education on it, and there's not a lot of people. There's a lot of people that don't want to talk bad about it, essentially because they're making money off it. You know what I mean? And they just don't
Right.
know. I think a lot of people are addicted on it right now, and they don't even know, or they don't want to admit it, or they're in denial. And like I said, you don't want to, you feel weak for saying that you're hooked on something, or it's vulnerable, or, and it sucks to sort of say, hey, I went through this. Luckily, I've come off it since then, and that's why I'm speaking out about it now. And I've been able to sort of get off this, and I'm going back to meetings myself, and I'm, working with other people in the addictionist industry and stuff, and I'm doing much better. But it's something that I wish I never had got on. And a lot of people are stuck in this vicious cycle right now. And I think it sucks. And I think we'll see a lot more people coming forward saying, yeah, this is the case for them too.
Someone like you that has tendencies for addiction mentally, how was this presented to you, and how did you justify this of being a product that you could take without thinking that you were going to have these same kind of characteristics of what you would have with opiates?
Well, so when I first took it, I was with a friend, and he had some, and we were going to train legs. I was out of town, and he just presented it as a pre-workout. He was like,
As a
hey,
pre-workout, yeah.
and this is a pre-workout. You don't have to use caffeine, and this will sort of give you the same sort of effect to get you through your workout. So I was like, okay, I mean, I'll try it. I didn't really, honestly, the problem is that for a lot of people, it's like you think kratom is legal. So it's easy to say, oh, well, it's not a big deal. If it's legal, why would something be legal if it's that bad? You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's very easy to say, like in my head, I'm like, this isn't anything really special. It's probably weak. It's nothing too serious. If this is the way it's talked about is very nonchalant, let's be honest. No one's
Yeah.
really come out like I have and said, hey, this is sort of the deal. So all I was hearing was just, hey, this is not a big deal. A lot of people try to compare it to caffeine or nicotine, or, it's not that big of a deal. So for me, it was just like, oh, it's a pre-workout type thing. And the problem with me, once I put that something like that in my body as an addict, my mind is gonna, justify that and say, oh, I can do this, I can manage this, this is okay. Which so once I put one substance in my body, like especially my drug of choice, I'm screwed, and I'm off and running, even if it might take time to get there. But for me, like my disease of addiction is progressive. So once I put something in my body, that's how I went from, one dose of mint 45 to, taking a bunch of these 7-0 pills every day. You know what I mean? So, and unfortunately, I'm defenseless against that. I'll admit that. I'm a drug addict. And I always need to be in some kind of recovery and some kind of program, and that's just the way it is. And I'm okay to admit that. And there's a lot of people that are going to need some help with this. Unfortunately, but yeah, it's just downplayed very easily.
It seems like it's a product that has circulated throughout the bodybuilding industry within the last, I'd say, few years, especially with some of the recent sponsorships that you see from athletes, professional athletes. A fair number of professional athletes really that have this sponsorship, that have this discount code. And I agree that not something I've ever taken, but I do see it presented in the same way as a pre-workout. So I could see not really having the education further to the potential further harmful effects of what it could have for certain individuals. As you mentioned, there may be some that may not have these effects, that don't have those addictive tendencies. But you do think it really comes down to the education factor, where it's really in the same light of, like you said, a pre-workout in particular, when it could be more serious for people in terms of, being addicted and having withdrawals from that.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like I said, the guy that I posted on my story, he's a good friend of mine and he's friends of any pro bodybuilders and he got introduced through a pro bodybuilder and he wasn't an addict, but the problem was he just wasn't educated, and he just that's the problem is, once you become physically dependent on something, you're sort of screwed. You know what I mean? Whether you're an addict or not. So sometimes, one of these, like I said, a lot of guys are in prep, using this every day and they might not be an addict, but it's not that easy. Just even if you're not an addict, you can't just stop because you're physically dependent on something because you start going through these cold sweats, you feel miserable, you don't want to live. Like it's just horrible. Like so, and it lasts 7 to 10 days and it feels like forever. It feels so long, it's just miserable. And it's literally like hell if you ask anyone that's ever been through this. And so even if you're not an addict or not, if you don't have that education, like, and let's say you just take it every day, you're not really thinking about it, you know what I mean? Until you try to come off it and you're like, oh shit, I feel like absolutely dog crap.
Now, you did have a lot of people reach out to you after you made that post on Instagram with their experiences from Kratom. Tell me about those.
Yeah, no, I've had many people sort of feel the same way. I was on a podcast again last night, and even the guy was saying, he was taking not even the pills and the MIT 45 extract, and he tried to come off it and was getting the cold sweats and felt like shit. And I know another guy that was in prep, that just was taking it every day in prep, and he tried to take off, not stop taking it in 7 weeks out, and he started going through the physical withdrawals, and so even in the MIT 45, a lot of guys will say, well, it's not as strong as the 7-0 pills, but both of those will make you go through physical withdrawals if you take them pretty much for, I would say, 5, 6, 7 days in a row. And a lot of people were messaging me, like struggling. I got a lot of DMs. Obviously, you saw a lot of comments, in my posts of there was really one person that was like, you know, argumentative, but then everyone else was like, yeah, this stuff is trash. It's garbage. It's not good for the industry. It's not good for people. It's just not a good way. It's too addicting. You know what I mean? I think whether you have addiction or not, it can be hard to control, especially when you're in prep, because let's face it, we don't have the best thinking in prep. It's easy to justify to get us through prep and then I'll stop. You know what I mean? But the problem is, like I said, if you take it long enough, it's like you don't really have that willpower, whether you're an addict or not, to go through that sort of living hell of detoxing off this stuff, and anyone that's been through opiate withdrawals knows it's not fun, and it's very hard to get through. And it's easy to just keep taking the kratom, you know what I mean? And like I said, it's on every corner down here. And like the crazy thing is in the US, I know in Canada it's not legal, but there's even some states in the US it's illegal. There's some like in Florida, there's some counties it's illegal. So there are some places that are making it illegal because I think there is some awareness on it. And some of these states are sort of knowing that, hey, this isn't the greatest thing, out there. Um, yeah, so it's just more and more people I think are going to be coming forward, and because it's only been out for like a year or so in the bodybuilding world. So I think we're going to see more and more stories like this. And I just, for me, I don't care if I put my name on the line, if I can stop one person from trying it and getting physically hooked on this stuff. Because the guy I posted is a good friend of mine. He's a massage therapist. He's massaged me plenty of times down. Flew down from Indiana. He's very good friends with Derek Lunsford. He's a great guy. He has a family of three, like kids with a beautiful wife, family, so, and he's, like I said, he was in the hospital because of this stuff, because he didn't know what to do, because he didn't have that addiction history. He didn't know like what's going on, like I'm feeling like all this stuff, and he just didn't know what to do, and so he had to go in the hospital. And a lot of this stuff is expensive. Some of these guys that go through detox, it's like $1,000 a day to go through detox, or rehabs, or to come off this stuff. So and a lot of guys can't do this alone, to come off this stuff, because it is very, very hard to come off of once you're physically dependent on it.
So do you think it comes down to the companies to really educate people on what you can actually experience with this, or what is it going to come down to for people to really come to the that education factor of these are some of the potential harmful effects? To me, it doesn't seem like the companies are going to come out and really give fair warning on what this could possibly do to an unknowing individual. So what is it going to take?
I mean, I really do think it should be illegal, honestly, first of all. But
Okay.
secondly, I mean, if I was an athlete promoting this, which I never would, I would be a little more upfront and just say, hey guys, this take at your own risk. This can be physically dependent. If you can be physically dependent on this. If you take this more than, a couple days in a row, keep your doses low and try to keep it manageable. Don't use it consecutively. I've never heard anyone say that. And the problem is, that messes with people money in their pocket, right? So a lot of these companies aren't going to be like, hey, don't take this as much as you should, you know what I mean? Because they're going to lose money, unfortunately. And I think the problem is, it starts at the top with these companies, and I think a lot of these athletes and the people pushing this is just parroting what these companies are telling them. It's not their own fault. I don't blame the athletes because I don't think they're educated. I think it's just these companies saying, hey guys, here's sort of what to say. It's not addicting, it's not this or that. And I just think, I don't see any athletes really saying up front, hey guys, take it your own risk. This could be, if you have an addiction history, I wouldn't take this. I've never seen that recommended, you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff.
Well,
But
there
I
are
think that,
plenty of substances in bodybuilding that people are warned about. Virtually every substance that you need to do at the pro level in bodybuilding, people are warned about those things. So why is it that the warning factor is not coming through on this in particular?
well, I think because it's easily justifiable, like I said, it's nothing that really becomes, like I said, there's no hangover, there's no immediate like negative effect. It's just one of those things that sort of creeps up on you. And I think it's very new, in the industry. So I think a lot of these guys just are unaware. And I think, like I said before, a lot of these guys I think are physically addicted to it, but they don't want to admit it. They're
Yep.
getting this stuff for free, they're taking it every day. And I don't think it's hard to admit, that you sort of look weak, right? So I think a lot of these guys are just sort of like, hiding in their own shell and not really, being sort of open about it. And yeah, I think it will change though, I'm hoping, putting some of this stuff out there, more of the real education and the real effects that I can have, and that's sort of why I'm trying to do this, is just sort of like get the word out there a little bit more. If you want to take kratom, great, but just take it at your own risk, and be aware that, hey, this is what can happen. And there are different kratoms, there are different strengths. And the problem is these companies, it's like anything, if they can get away with it while they can, they're keeping and making it stronger and stronger. Like I was saying, those pills, they started out at 10 milligrams. Now they got 20 milligram ones. Now they got 30 milligrams. So it's like they keep making them stronger and stronger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Obviously, I think this will get shut down sooner or later. It's like, when the K2 came out and like the legal weed and all that kind of stuff, and then they would change the formula. I think it's sort of like one of those things, where they're gonna keep trying to sort of like replace this chemical with that chemical to sort of be able to sell it, or whatever. But um, it can have its benefits, like if someone, is in a lot of pain and they got an injury and the doctors don't want to give them a real painkiller, that can be beneficial. But you just got to be aware and responsible to know that, hey, you take this for too long or too much, you're gonna be in a hole where you can't get out of, and you're physically dependent on this stuff, and it's a vicious circle, and it's depressing. I was very, I felt like I was just sort of in a little circle there for a while, and I just couldn't come off this stuff, and I was just sort of like, man, I was just beating myself up. I felt like not happy. I was miserable, and I was just like, man, I'm stuck on this shit. Like, it sucks. Like, I don't know what to do, and I'm just sort of back and forth. And I would quit one day, and then I would feel so miserable. I'd go back and just sort of back and forth, and until I finally just knew, I didn't want to lose all the stuff that I'd gained in life, and I felt like stuff was slipping away. I was spending a lot of money on this stuff, man. It's not cheap, So, one of those little gel packs is like 12 bucks, So if you use, 3 or 4 of those a day, 50 bucks a day, like,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, that's expensive, man. That's expensive. I didn't realize it was that expensive. Holy shit.
And what really scares me too is, I have a lot of friends that have passed away through, opioid addiction. And what I see, in the future is like, what I'm seeing is like, an addict can start taking kratom, and then it can lead them back to the street drug. And then maybe they start using fentanyl again, or shoot, you know what I mean? Like go back to their street drug of choice. Because like I said, kratom can become more expensive. The tolerance gets higher and higher. And it's like what happened with oxys were so expensive that a lot of guys, they turned to heroin. Heroin's dirt cheap on the street. You can get it anywhere. Like at least down here in the States, like, you get $20 a bag and instead of like spending 80 or $100, so it can create this bigger problem than I think we realize, and there's a lot of people in this industry that have addicted pasts. A lot of them are opiate addicts, because it's a very strong, out of all drugs, opiates are the most dangerous and physically addicting, and they're hardest to come off. Like cocaine, you can stop taking it and it might be a little discontented or whatever, but it's not the same. Like there's no other drug you become physically dependent on it, like an opioid or kratom or, methadone, Suboxone, all those things. There's nothing else in the drug categories that you become physically dependent on, where you get withdrawals and you get sick for like, a week or two, so it's just scary. And I see a lot of guys, I could see things happening where, it leads them back to a street drug like heroin or fentanyl, so, which is really big in the States, so.
Yeah, the thing is, this is something that seems to be generating an amount of revenue, an amount of income for athletes. This is something that seems to be generating an amount of revenue and amount of income for bodybuilding overall. I mean, we have the IFBB, the Olympia organization that's associated with this product at this point, right? I think
Yeah.
you're right. I think it does come down to an amount of education. It comes down to people on an individual level. When you have the information, make the proper choice for yourself. Like you said, for some people, this could be something that's viable in order to help them get through. It could be a prep. It could be, like you said, something less of a painkillers type scenario. Possibilities are there, but just know what it is that you're taking, have the education, and especially when it comes to anything, any substance that you're taking in bodybuilding, I think the number one piece of advice that you can give people is to start out small. Don't go right to the extract of the extract. Start with, like you said, the tea leaf extract, and then see how you respond to that. It's just like you could go back to the pre-workout comparison. You don't just do 2 scoops of pre-workout when you first start working out, right? Or you first start taking it. Take a half a scoop and see how you feel, because even pre-workout, if you take a couple scoops of pre-workout and you're 3-4 hours before you go to bed, you go train, your sleep is going to be affected. Okay. Yours truly can definitely attest to that. So
Yeah.
just know what it is that you're taking, start out with proper dosages, just like anything in bodybuilding, anything in life, really. And just know what it is that you're taking and how much.
Also, too, educate yourself. I wish I would have went on like Reddit forums and YouTube videos, because I see a lot of that stuff now. A lot of these guys are saying what I'm saying, but they're not in the bodybuilding world. You know what I mean? But I was just taking for what the bodybuilders were saying, but they weren't educated enough. I'll be honest with you. They just are, like I said, they're parroting what these companies are telling them. It's a new thing in the bodybuilding world, but it has been around and outside. So, like, if you go on Reddit forums and just type this stuff in, you'll see there's a list. There's tons of forums talking about this stuff. Is that the problem is it's not very mainstream or in the bodybuilding industry. And I was gonna say something else, but I can't remember. But yeah, and
Look,
also
look,
it was scary, they're I guess someone was saying at the Arnold, they're just handing out at the expo, to try for people, you know what I mean? Like, so, that's sort of scary, just handing them out. And they're not, I don't think they're probably, hey, when you're waiting in line at the Arnold Expo and they give you, I don't think they're saying, hey, be careful, don't take, they're not saying all this stuff. They're probably just like, here, try this. And that was it, and these, and
yeah,
the scary thing is too, like this is available to young kids too, I'm sure, if you're 18, 19, you can get your hands on this pretty easily, and it's like I said, it's in every store, like where at least, oxys and heroin is hard. It can be hard to find, but like this stuff's everywhere. It's like, and down here, it's crazy. Even when I was up visiting my girlfriend in Hampshire, we're out to eat, and across the street, there's this big sign, Kratom, flag, it's like everywhere. It's like flashing lights, Kratom in the gas station. It's just like insane.
wow. No, I did not realize that it was so prevalent, throughout just even outside of bodybuilding. You go to random smoke shops and things like that in the United States. No, like I said, know what you're taking, start out small, and do your research. That's definitely the big takeaways from this.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, okay. Tell me about Nate Spear. Tell me about what you got coming up for the 2025 season and beyond. What do you got coming up when it comes to your own competition schedule? You got anything on the books?
So I am looking at, so I did want to So after last year, I did want to take a little bit of a longer of an off season, and I am looking at. I think I'm going to hit Detroit. It's not 2025, but it'll be early 26. They moved it up a little bit on the calendar. I think it's like February 20 something. So it's 2 weeks before the Arnold. So for me, I'd start prepping November or something like that. And I'm excited because I want to do the Detroit show. I'm excited because they highlight open bodybuilding. They have the great lighting, it's like, and everyone was talking about like the sort of theater setup, and it just seems like a really cool show that I would love to be a part of and do. And they really just like highlight the athletes, and they do a great job, like leading up to the show, they're posting who's doing it. They're making cool like banners and flyers and stuff. And, I really appreciate when, they put the highlight on the open bodybuilders, because I've done some shows where it's just sort of, you're just a number, they have a big show. They got masters, they got amateurs, they got tons of people in the show, and it's sort of, a cluster, and they don't really give you too much of the respect I think you should get. Whereas Detroit, I feel like they really highlight the guys, and also too, for me, I'm trying to be a little bit strategic. Open bodybuilding right now is very competitive. There's a lot of great guys, as we see with Pittsburgh and New York. There's a reason why Regan isn't doing New York anymore, and he's a great bodybuilder. You sort of got to pick and choose wisely. I feel like if you're an open pro now, because a lot of these guys, the bigger names are doing the shows. There's very heavy competition. So, and I'm probably looking at maybe Legion next year too, because they pushed it up on the calendar. And it's a show. It's like a tier 2 show. There's usually some good guys, but it's not like, there's not tons of Olympians in it, and like Texas or something, or Tampa gets pretty heavy too. And I wanted to do something earlier in the year because I didn't really want to sit out too long, but enough to make some good progress and put some good size on, bring my backside up a little bit more, and just keep sort of maturing my physique. And I think next year will be a really good look. I'm excited. I'll be working with a new coach too. So I haven't ever I've worked with one coach the whole time, my whole bodybuilding career. So it'll be exciting to, work with someone new, and try some different things and learn some different things. And I'm really excited about that. And, I might do New York too in between. So it'd be like Detroit, New York, Legion. And I think that would be really fun. New York's a great show just to be a part of, because it's just historical, Steve's show. And I'm from the Northeast, and a lot of friends can come down and check it out. And it's always good lighting. And I'm pretty picky now. Like, it's, like I did Toronto and Tampa, and honestly, the lighting was not the greatest. And so you don't really get the great stage picks, whereas Detroit, you
Oh
got the amazing
man.
lighting. New
So
York is
Toronto, you're right about Detroit. You're right about New York. Fantastic lighting, fantastic backdrops. They're great. Toronto, literally the background for the last 2 years has been, and maybe even longer, has been spray tan brown. Man, the
right.
background color has been. It's like going up there in camouflage, dude. Like it's
Right.
that is one thing that I would love to see change. I'm glad that there's still Canadian shows happening. As a Canadian,
Yeah.
I want to see more of those pro Canadian shows happen. But you're right. Detroit especially is, I think it's going to be a game changer in the next 2 to 3 years in terms of setting a standard for future competitions. It's pushing an envelope that just nobody would push. Fuad was absolutely on point as far as I'm concerned, of asking the questions of, well, there's no black backdrops. Why are there no
Right.
black backdrops? He was given the answers of, well, it comes down to sponsors, it comes down to money. Okay, then I'm going to do it myself. And I think you will see other competitions follow suit to find a way to find that balance, just as Fuad did, right? Use it as a template of satisfying the sponsors of the sport, making sure that the athletes are getting the respect that they deserve, and really getting the full experience as athletes as well. As you say, it's very important to you that way. And I think that they're doing a fantastic job down there. I think they're doing fantastic.
Well, also too, I think there's, no matter what, sponsors are always going to be part of the show, and there's other ways to highlight the sponsors. I don't think, it's not an end all be all, like, oh, this is the only way we can highlight our sponsors. It's like, come on, guys. Like, maybe if you have the live stream, you just have all the sponsor at the bottom of the screen or something, or there's ways around it. I think they're just being a little bit too particular. And I do like there is being some boundaries pushed. I don't know if you've seen with the Arnold and Dan Solomon are going back and forth. I don't know if you saw that, but
Yeah,
the
I
Arnold,
saw a little. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I was surprised
yeah.
that they were pushing it like that. But the Arnold always has great lighting and production, man. Like, so, I wish the Olympia would. I think they're just being stubborn, honestly. I think if they could just, change it up a little bit, they don't need all the fireworks and the flashy, like crazy stuff, because like you said with the Toronto, it's like it takes away from the physique, and for
It
me, I'm a
does.
big believer in, the physique is your brand. If you have better physiques, I think that's going to market the IFBB better, you know.
It's
Um,
bodybuilding. We want to see the bodybuilders in the best
right,
possible scenario that we can. That's what it
right,
comes down to. There is a balance that can be struck in there. I don't think that it's even that difficult for promoters. And to be honest with you, it would probably save promoters money in the end without having to do this massive amount of production. We want to see
right.
the athletes. Sponsors definitely have to have their fair shake. There's no question, but there's a better balance than what we've been seeing in the last couple of years, and certainly better colors you can choose. Like I said, Toronto was case in point. Worst
Right.
background of any show, and I covered them all, man. It's the worst background of any of them.
Well, yeah, and speaking of Canada shows, is when I did Vancouver, they had great lighting. They had the black and blue, and I like that a lot. And
Fantastic, yeah.
they got rid of it, but hopefully it'll come back around. But that was a
I
great
hope so,
show.
man. Yeah, I
Yeah,
hope so. That was a sleeper show, you know. We saw like when Hadi Chupin did that one, Hassan
yeah,
Mustafa came in and did really well with that. That was a sleeper show, you know. I want to see it come back as well.
and it's a beautiful area. I know you're around that area, I think, or no, or close
Nah,
to it.
no,
But
I'm the East Coast. They're out there, but
oh,
I lived in BC. Like I went to dive school on Vancouver Island, so I was right there in the middle of the winter. Like it was like 3 feet of snow at home, and people were mowing their lawns there in mid-February. It was ridiculous, right? Like it's
dude,
beautiful
it was
there. It's a
awesome. I went up
great
there for the
place.
show. Oh, it's so beautiful. The
Yeah.
mountains, the fresh air in the summer, like, whew, I
Yeah,
like
and you're
that area.
right on the doorstep of like California, you know, a lot of competitors down that way on the West Coast, Texas, you know, not that far of a stretch really to go and make it up there. So no, I'd love to see Vancouver come back.
Yeah.
Maybe one of these days. Maybe one of these days. So talk to me about some of the improvements that you plan on making when it comes to the next time we do see you hit the stage. What is it that you want to improve on?
Yeah, so honestly, I think my front shots and side shots are pretty solid. I'm really just trying to work on the backside, so like more hamstring development, more adductor development. I've been training my glutes more directly to bring up a little more glute density. Like you see guys like Martin and Derek, they got like the full hard glutes, and I think if I could fill that out more, it'll balance my back shots out more. And a lot of guys, let's be honest, we don't really train glutes, and I think it'll just help me bring a better balanced back shots and also the back in general, just improving those back shots is I sort of think will help get me ahead a little bit more. And I've been training my calves more too, So
Nice,
just the
yeah.
overall complete look of the back shots and still just trying to get my quads a little bigger. I mean, they've come up a lot over the years, but still, I've always been an upper body sort of dominant kind of guy. So just always trying to fight that battle of, getting keeping the legs big, keeping them full. And I was really happy with how my legs looked last year, but it's just always trying to improve those and improve the lats and the taper. Shape is a big game right now, let's be honest, so
Oh
if
yeah.
you got a nice taper and a small waist, you can go far. So if I can continue to improve the aesthetic of my physique while getting slightly bigger, I think that'll help me a lot, and yeah, I'm excited. I think I got a good physique, and I can place well. It's just, making those fine adjustments and the biggest thing as a pro is nailing the peak on that day, right? We've seen a lot of it happen, if the guy peaks right on that day, he can shock a lot of people and do really well. So
Absolutely. You mentioned working with a new coach. Do you want to say who it is?
I haven't really picked anyone yet, but I got some names, I'll just go that far, but I definitely some guys that are stateside, not as well known, like no big gurus. I'm not like an Aceto or George Farah, like, you know what I mean. There's a couple of guys that are doing good on the scene that I have my eyes on. Like, I'm watching Dominic Cardone, Chris Tuttle. Those guys are doing really good. I like AJ Sims too. He always got people peeled out of their minds. So I'm a conditioning guy, and the coaches that bring in the shredded physiques is the guys that I'm drawn to. I don't conditioning is my game. That's how I'm going to do well. And Tyler's told me that too. A couple times I've tried to come in a little fuller, and he's like, "Hey, just stick to being dry and shredded and detailed. That's sort of your game, and that's how you'll do well." Some guys can come in a little fuller and sacrifice some conditioning. I'm not that guy. I got to come out inside out peeled to place on the best I can and have that detail. And so that's sort of what I'm looking for in a coach. And having that good relationship with them too, and I know some of those guys that I named and have a little bit personal relationships with them. So, it'd be easy to transition, instead of just getting someone new that I don't know and, just a number, like if I worked with like, an Aceto or Hani or, Stefan, it's like, I'd probably just be a number, honestly, and I wouldn't really feel maybe I could have the attention that, I would want if I'm paying a coach,
Man, if you could get AJ Sims as your coach, that would be a game changer, man, because
Right.
there's a lot of people that would love to work with AJ Sims right now, and I know that he's not really taken on many people. So,
Yeah, I
and
know he doesn't really. He's frustrated and he doesn't like working with pros, but I think I'm a little bit different as far as that goes. I'm not one of those genetic freaks that's a diva. I think he's worked with a lot of diva type guys, and he's
yeah,
gotten a little
dude, you know
burnt
Diva,
out.
that's for fucking sure. Yeah.
I'm not, so you know who I'm talking about, but no,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
he's done like Justin Rodriguez. He's looked his best ever with AJ, and he never really looked the same. Hassan looked his best ever with
Hassan.
AJ.
Yep.
He did
Yeah.
amazing stuff with guys that had stubborn bodies, and he's this is a cement factory for a reason, right? So
Oh man, look at Robert Timms, classic physique, insanely shredded,
right.
insane, man. Yeah, if that was a guy that could definitely get you that next level, there's no question. For you, the quads, it's funny where you say you were always upper body dominant because I always found that the balance was always really good. The quads, though, always stood out to me. Just me personally. I always noticed the quads when it came to you in particular. The detail definitely there. I'd like to see a little bit more of like the roundness and the sweep of the quads, like from the hip tie in down into the quad, right? If you were to be able to have that X
Yeah.
frame is definitely there. That improvement, I think, would definitely take you up a couple of notches, man. The front shots, I agree with you, fantastic. Side shots, most definitely as well. That's the one thing, because you're right, the aesthetics, the shape, that is a big thing right now. Size-wise, you'll be able to put on the size by the next Detroit Pro. I have no question in that.
Right.
The details and the shape, the symmetry, things like that. Symmetry, you're fine, no question. But yeah, I'd like to see that. I think that would really put you up and over the top.
I agree, and we'll definitely be working on it. More sleep for sure, brother.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Well, listen, man, I think I'm going to wrap this one up here. I got a couple of upcoming episodes of the Bodybuilding Breakdown. I think I'd like to get you in on a couple of them actually. So, yeah, we were planning on doing this for a while, and fucking life gets
Yeah,
busy, of course. And everybody
yeah.
got their shit they got to
Oh,
deal
yeah.
with, but I'm glad that I got you on, man. And I'm glad you were able to get on here, talk about something that really could help people in the industry, and we'll make sure that we get on. We'll shoot some shit on some upcoming shows, and we'll see what we end up with.
I would love to, man. Always a big fan of your channel, so keep doing your thing, brother.
Nah, I appreciate it, man. All right, that sounds good to me. Well, I'll wrap it up here. That's going to do it for this episode of the Bodybuilding Breakdown. Catch you guys in the next one.